Hello everyone, I'm Zahid from Talks at Innovation Valley, and today we have a very amazing guest, Dr. Faheem Ullah. Dr. Faheem Ullah is an assistant professor and cybersecurity program director at the University of Adelaide, Australia. He is also the big data lead at CREST, Center for Research on Engineering Software Technologies. Faheem completed PhD and postdoc in computer science from the University of Adelaide. He is a two times gold medalist, one time silver medalist, and receiver of six academic distinctions. He secured a scholarship for undergrad studies, four scholarships for master's studies, and two scholarships for PhD. His research areas include cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and software engineering. So, first of all, I really warm welcome you, Dr. Fahim.
Thank you, Zahid, for having me.
You're welcome. Today, our topic is AI tools for researchers. So, Fahim, before we jump to the questions and the topic, I would love my audience to know about your story, about your journey, about your education, from where you are in Pakistan, from where you got your schooling, college, and university education, and then when you shifted to Australia and how you got to this point. How was all this journey, Fahim?
Yeah, Zahid, so I did engineering in computer science from GIK, which is an engineering school in Sawabi near Islamabad. And after completing my bachelor's degree, I then moved to Australia to pursue a PhD degree. It took almost, I think, 3 or 3.5 years to complete PhD. And after PhD, I did postdoc also from the same school. And after a couple of years postdoc, then I started working here at the University of Adelaide as as an assistant professor. And now in this job, I do kind of different sort of stuff. Of course, I do teaching, and more than that, I also do a lot of research. I work with industry, I work with government, and as you already mentioned, so the areas in which I do research, it's mostly cybersecurity, software engineering, and artificial intelligence.
All right. Fahim, let's move to the questions. Fahim, how AI tools can be used by researchers?
So this particular question, I think I can answer in three different parts. The first one is that I think researchers, it's very important for them to know that there are a lot of tools that are available out there, and those tools can help them in so many different ways. For example, there are tools that can help in conducting literature review. There are tools that can help in writing papers, in reading papers. Similarly, there are tools that can help them to make presentations. So the first point is that as a researcher, we should be aware that there are these tools that are available and they can facilitate our research. The second part would be that these tools needs to be used in a very cautious way. Um, I personally would advocate a very cautious use of this in the sense that we should not blindly trust the outcome of these different tools. So that part obviously we'll cover it more in detail in the rest of this discussion. And the third point is that as a researcher, um, whenever a researcher is using these tools, it's very important that this thing is disclosed, that in which particular way AI tools have been used, and for many different reasons, obviously for ethical reasons, but also for the reasons of replication. That if another researcher wants to replicate those results, he or she should be aware that how these results have been obtained. In this context, when we are reporting our results, I believe that it becomes far more important that we focus on the methodology section, that uh, we report in significant detail that how this research was conducted, what sort of tools have been used, in what way they have been used, so that other researchers, they can, if they want to, they can replicate those results.
All right. Fahim, is it ethical to use AI for the research?
So again, Zahid, this is the thing with what we are talking about today. It's a very sensitive area. In a lot of this discussion, you would see that there are not white and black answers. When we say is it ethical, my first answer would be yes, it is ethical. But then there are some strings attached to it, and what that means is that these tools uh, should play the role of a facilitator. They are not supposed to replace a human being. Uh, when I say that it's ethical, it is ethical when we declare it. As I mentioned in the previous part, that uh, as a researcher, it is important that there is transparency and then there is also integrity. So when I'm using these tools to help me in different kind of tasks, like for example, there are tools like lit maps or site AI and so on, and they can help me to do a literature review. Let's say if normally it takes me 6 months to do a solid literature review, these tools can help me to do it, let's say, in 3 months. So obviously I should use it. There's no, I don't see any harm in using these tools. The problem comes if I'm not declaring it. If I'm claiming the work that is done by some AI tool to be mine, so that is the problem. And as far as the crisp answer to this question is concerned, so it is ethical, but it need to be conducted in certain boundary, or they need to be used within a certain boundary. And obviously, in almost every situation, their use should be declared.
All right. Fahim, there is a certain mindset and certain, many people, they say AI tools disturbs the learning process. It sometimes kill the creativity. Do you really think that AI tools kill the creativity, or it, affects the learning process?
No, it doesn't. So Zahid, it's like every innovation has its good side and its bad side. Like for example, if we take the example of a cell phone, so one can say it's a good thing, another person can say it's a bad thing. For example, if a kid is using it consecutively for, let's say, 8 hours or 9 or 10 hours, so obviously it's not good for the kid. It might affect the eyesight of the kid. But if we look at it from another perspective, and if a person is using cell phone, let's suppose, to learn or to read some kind of an article, or for many other different purposes, let's say using it for call and Uber. So those are all the good sides of using a cell phone. In the same way, when we are talking about the use of AI, not just in the field of research, but in many other different domains, um, there are arguments for it and there are arguments against it. So many people, they think that AI might take their jobs, and this revolution of AI, especially these days, it's so much talked about issue. I look at it from a more optimistic point of view. I think that in my view is based on history. So over the years, if we see, there has been evolutions of different sorts. Like for example, when there was industrial kind of boom, many people thought their jobs would be gone, but that's not the case. We as human, we adopt, and I believe that the same would happen in the case of AI. As we see more and more pervasive use of artificial intelligence, accordingly, the bodies that make rules and regulations, they would jump, they would sort of poke up, and they would set the boundaries that how these needs to be used. Now, coming back to the point that you mentioned, that whether AI is going to kill creativity or is it going to affect the learning process, to link it to what I already mentioned, if it's used uh, in a very irresponsible way, it might. For example, when we ask students to, let's suppose, work on a particular assignment, and if they go and they ask ChatGPT or any other tool of that sort to just do that thing for the student, now that's not the right use, and that sort of use certainly should be discouraged because it does affect the learning process. However, if ChatGPT is used, or any other AI tool for that matter, is only used for to get some initial idea, or just as a to get some food for thought, then that's a good use. And I can also tell you that as far as my experience is concerned, as more and more AI tools are getting introduced, the bodies which are sort of in that domain, like for example educational institutes, they are developing the guidelines, they are developing rules and regulations to make sure that these tools does not affect the learning or the creativity angle of the students or the researchers for that matter.
All right. Fahim, what are the pros and cons of using AI in the research?
Yeah, so this is also very much linked to the previous question that as far as the pros are concerned, obviously it it makes it to sort of that we can do things faster. Like for example, if I'm analyzing data manually, let's suppose an Excel sheet, it would take me a lot of time. But if I can input that data into some sort of algorithm or some sort of AI model, it can help to analyze the data more quickly. Um, in the same manner as I previously gave the example that if I have to, back in my days when I was doing PhD, especially in the first year, I did the entire literature review process manually, the identification of papers, then the extraction of data from those papers, then the correlation of the extracted data. All of those things I did manually. However, if I go back and if I have to do it again, I would not do it manually. I would use tools like, for example, these tools like Connected Papers, this one, the one I mentioned, Lit Maps, Research Rabbit. They can help me in the identification of the right set of papers. Then these tools can also help me to extract data from these papers, correlate the data, and then even come up with categorizations. So as I mentioned, that the same thing that I did, let's say in 6 months, I would be able to do it in 3 months. So that's the big pro. As far as the cons are concerned, so the first one is that if these are used blindly, it would become a problem. I'll give you an example with the with ChatGPT. It the content that it creates, it need to be double checked. For example, I was doing something. I was almost finalizing a paper, and then just wanted to make sure that I have not missed any particular paper that needed to be included in the related work section. So out of my own curiosity, I just went to ChatGPT and just input the some basic info about my paper and asked that, can you give me a list of the related works? And it generated a very lengthy list of papers, like 10, 12 papers. And the titles of those papers seemed very much relevant to what I was doing. So I was like, this is pretty close to what I'm doing. How could I miss these papers? And then what happened was that, and interestingly, it creates very much believable kind of references. So there were author names, there were the titles of the papers, the publication menus, here's everything. And then I was certainly more curious to see that how could I miss these big papers. And then I picked those references, put it in the Google Scholar, and I couldn't find the paper. Then I went to these digital databases like ACM or IEEE, and I input those papers. Again, I couldn't find. So what that means is that those were completely fake references. It went totally wrong. And I have heard stories where people have included such kind of references in their presentations or in papers, but there's no reality to it. So that's the downside of it. When things are taken completely blindly and trusted. Obviously, there are so many other things that are that needed to be considered. Like, for example, it's not transparent when you're using these AI tools. You don't understand how they are generating the output. Just to give you another example, I was recently, I think a couple of weeks ago, I was developing. I was building a machine learning model for a particular use case, and the data set was not that big. It was like 2-3 GB of data. And when I was getting the output, I was not kind of sure how it is generating that output. So what I did was that instead of that 2-3 GB data, I just made a very small list, let's say 100 or 150 instances, and I trained the model with that very limited data, just to understand, to do the reverse engineering, that how exactly I'm getting the output from that model. So those sorts of things you can't do with these models which are trained on such huge amount of data. You can't have that ability to do the reverse engineering and how you're getting these outputs.
All right. Fahim, why students should use the tools like ChatGPT? What are the top benefits of using such kind of tools?
Yes, Zahid, one before I answer the exact question, one thing which is very much talked about is that should we use these tools or should the students be allowed to use these tools like ChatGPT? My stance on this is that I think we are far beyond that particular discussion, because it's not up to us anymore to decide whether to use or not to use. If there is a need for it, if there is a market need, these tools are going to come, and willingly or unwillingly they will be used. I think the discussion should be more around the point that how we can use them more responsibly, how we can make sure that they are not sort of used in a way where it hits the creativity or the learning process of the students. So, coming to your question, that should students be using tools like ChatGPT? Um, Irrespective of which stage we are in, like whether the student is doing his undergrad or master's or a PhD degree, I don't see any harm in using them, um, unless they are used totally blindly or the output is taken as such. Because my understanding is that these tools are, although there is a lot of talk about it that ChatGPT can do this and there are other tools who can do this, but in reality, these tools are still uh, far behind in the human intelligence level. So, if these tools are used only for the purpose of, let's say, having some initial idea, or for, let's suppose, if you have written a paragraph and you want to make it more smooth, for those sorts of purposes, these two tools can work very well. As we go into more specialization where context is required, where the domain specialization is required, these tools are unable to work. And also, I believe that institutions, in as well as when we speak about research, journals and conferences, they are coming up with new rules and regulations. For example, um, like the as I mentioned, that the education institutes, they are making it more kind of the students informed that when they are using these tools, they need to declare it. And often at times, for a teacher, it's also very much possible to detect that whether something is written by the student or something is written by an AI machine. At the same time, for the education institutes or for teachers, they also need to be a bit more innovative, come up with the assessments of software. Even these tools, they cannot help. And I think it would happen, the assessment criteria, it would evolve as we see more and more pervasive use of these technologies. So for those sorts of purposes, this very initial idea generation or for some smooth writing, these tools are good. I don't see they are very much kind of they can do much when it comes to more specific tasks. Like, just to give you an example, if I ask ChatGPT to write an essay for me on, let's say, morning walk, it would work very well. But if I go and ask it something more deeper, let's say, if I ask that, give me some research topics that I can work on related to the vulnerabilities in software, it would generate some ideas, but those would be so generic that it won't be of much use to me.
All right. All right. Fahim, why we should be cautious about the use of AI tools like ChatGPT in education sector?
Yeah, so there are certain things which we need to keep in mind as we move forward with this generative AI stuff. For example, biased data, that's one big problem. If I train a model with let's say with data that is sort of incorrect or that is biased towards a particular thing, then the model is going to generate outputs which are kind of dependent on that biased or incorrect or maybe fabricated data. So that can become a problem. Again, the person who is training that model, his own biases included. So that's why when these models generate the output, we should be keep checking it to make sure that the outputs are not sort of biased towards a particular class. The other thing is about the, as I mentioned, that some of the outputs they are completely incorrect. So that again becomes an issue, and we should be cautious to make sure that we double check. Transparency, that becomes another issue. We don't exactly know that how these the models they are generating these outputs. So that also associates with a bit of lack of trust that, particularly in the field of research, maybe researchers might not trust it unless they exactly know the bits and pieces that how it through which processes it was passed and then this output was generated. And also about some sort of areas, the data is very much of confidential nature. And if we upload that sort of data to any tool, we might be sort of breaching some protocols. So we need to be careful over there as well that what we are feeding to these models or what sort of data we are providing as a user. We make sure that we don't sort of breach any protocols of the organization or whichever data we are working with. So those are some of the, I think, concerns around the use, or not concerns, but some certain things we should be cautious about when we are using these AI tools.
All right. Fahim, why there is so much boom about the AI tools, especially about its use in research community?
So this is more look. I think it's also there are reasons why AI became such a thing these days. Um, the amount of, so obviously there has been advancements in the way these algorithms are sort of coming up, like these deep learning and so on and so forth. So that's one reason that okay, we there is innovation, there are better algorithms to understand and then understand the data and so on. The other reason is that there is a lot of data that we are generating today. we look back, let's say 10 years ago, we were not generating that much of data, as much data we are generating today, because on average, every person has 2 to 3 digital devices, and through these devices, we are generating data, and then that data, these algorithms which I mentioned, they can learn from their data. And thirdly, there is also computational capability, which means that we have the algorithm, we have the data, and we have the infrastructure to learn from that data. So that is why there is so much hype about the use of these AI tools, not just in the field of research, but if you have a look at sectors like, for example, healthcare, transportation, mining, so many other fields where AI is entering and finding its legs. Also, another reason I would say that because it is bringing automation, it is reducing the load on human, and that is why there is sort of that financial angle attached to it. So all these are the reasons which is making or which is sort of laying grounds for AI to just fly and fly.
Right. What futuristic AI tools will the academics need for research in future?
Yeah, so this is a good question. And when I reflect on it, so I look at it from the perspective of my own journey, that from PhD until now, what is as such that um, can be automated through the use of AI tools. So most of the PhD students, initially the first year, one of the biggest hurdle is finding a gap. That what is the research gap that can be filled through the work of PhD. So I think that is one good use case, that if we could have some tool that can facilitate, I don't think it would completely sort of can do it for the student that, okay, here is the gap. That's not going to happen. But what I envision is that if a student inputs, let's say, 100 papers to a model, and if based on that, it can automatically, let's say, propose some options, let's say 5, 6 options, that these are the options which sort of there is some space for doing further research. So that would be a good use of AI. Having said that, I'm not sort of advocating that a student should not learn how to do gap analysis. But what I'm trying to say is that if there are tools that can facilitate them in doing so, that would be much better. Similarly, many a times what happens is that when we write papers, um, especially as a young or early career researcher, many a times we make statements which are not supported through a proper reference. So again, I think that here is some room for AI to jump in and detect that whether there are areas where references are missing. And in the same way, there are at times when I review papers, I see that there are statements or there are decisions taken which without any particular justification. For example, you would see paper where they are using a particular data set without mentioning why exactly they are using this particular data set. So again, there is I see room for AI where they can detect that there is a particular sort of decision made or choice made, and that is lacking justification. And other than that, these basic checks certainly tools can make, like for example, whether there are any typos or grammar issues in the manuscript, or another use case that I could think of is that if there can be tools which can, let's say, convert a text into a figure for, but primarily for researchers. I know there are tools which are converting text into images, but that's totally in a different class. Like they are more like a mountain and having, let's say, a bicycle or something. I'm more talking about if there is a process that is explained in text, and if there is an AI tool that can convert that text into, based on the text, it can generate a figure, let's suppose flow chart or something. So that would be very good. These are some of the cases, and of course, there's a lot of work already happening, like that are facilitating user readers. Sorry, that are facilitating researchers to read papers more efficiently, to make presentations more easier, to be more productive generally. So yeah, I think we'll see more and more tools developed along these lines in the coming years.
All right. Fahim, does the use of AI tools threaten academic or technical creativity in any way?
Zahid, we already had a little bit of discussion about this particular thing. I think a blind use of these tools, an irresponsible use of these tools, that certainly would threaten creativity. But a responsible, proper use of these tools won't. As I mentioned, that hopefully in the, I think there's a lot of work already happening. Some happened, and further is going to happen. I know there are many researchers who are working on this particular area about responsible use of AI. That uh, there are some boundaries set, because you might have heard that AI, it might be very intelligent, these machines, but they don't have feelings, and that's why they cannot sort of reach the level of humans. We humans have feelings. For example, on social media, you might have seen sometimes we have these. Um, they combine some photos and then they show you at the end of the year that okay, what happened last year and so on and so forth. Now, imagine if somebody's loved one have died, and then they see their photos, it makes them sort of sad. But the social media, the way it works, there is an algorithm behind it, and that algorithm doesn't understand human feelings. So that is why there is a lot of research going on. At least I know in Australia there is a lot of research going on this particular thing, that we make use of these AI or AI tools and algorithms in a more responsible way. As far as the creativity or the technical depth and strategy is concerned, I don't think so. I think it facilitates us, and it makes it easy for us to do the repetitive jobs. So if I'm, for example, transcribing an interview uh, manually, it might take me a lot of time. But if there is some AI tool that can directly transcribe it for me, it is supporting me. It's not really sort of threatening my ability to create. So that's why I don't think. Of course, I do think that on an immature level, students, particularly in schools or in colleges, there need to be far more regulations so that the students they learn the basic skills. Like a good example is that of when we were in schools, so they used to teach us this basic mathematics, like for example, how to multiply numbers or how to do division and so on. At that time, also, there were calculators that could do those things for us. But the point was that to make us learn and to make us understand how this works. Later on, obviously, an adult would not do it manually. He or she would just use a calculator to do these sorts of calculations. But at least we should have the skill and the ability to understand how things work. Other than that, I don't see any significant damage that these tools are going to cause.
All right. Fahim, what are some of the journal do's and don'ts that you would like to share with the PhD scholars in view of using AI tools?
Yeah, good question. Very pertinent questions. Right. So, as far as the use of these tools for PhD students is concerned, I think PhD is a time where you learn how to do research. The whole purpose of doing PhD or that 3 4 year time is to make an independent researcher out of you. So, I think a student should personally be sort of responsible enough to not use these tools where the learning curve is getting ahead. As a student, as a PhD student, I should know how to read the paper effectively. Yes, there are tools that can help me, but no, I should first learn myself as well how to read a paper more effectively. I should also learn how to do gap analysis. I should learn how to write papers. Um, when I'm saying these tools should be used, I'm in no way advocating that we should not learn the skills ourselves. We should learn, and then let's suppose we are doing the same thing, let's suppose in second year or third year, then these tools can be used to sort of facilitate us. And also I want to, sometimes because of this huge hype, some students might think that these tools can do everything for them. I don't think that's the case. uh, they can facilitate, but they cannot replace a human. Yes, they, if somebody knows, let's suppose 30 different tools, how to use them, and then there's another student and he or she doesn't know, then obviously the one who knows how to use the tools will go faster. Um, but the basics of research that should be learned even if we have these tools. And obviously the very you mentioned about the don'ts. I do want to emphasize that if you're using these tools, you need to be very cautious about certain things that I already mentioned. Um, the first one is the you need to look into the ethical boundaries of your institution or maybe the country you're working in. You also need to make sure that you declare it, because in research, integrity is a very important factor. And also, some of the maybe in other domains, um, the downsides might not be as significant as it is in research. So it's really important that it is declared where AI has been used and how it has been um, used. So I think that those are some of the very basics that as a PhD student I think I should keep in mind.
All right. Fahim, would you like to share some of the tool names that researchers must explore, especially the PhD scholars?
Yeah, so Zahid, I usually shared about tools and different sorts of tips and for PhD students particularly. So I would categorize it into different sectors. Like for example, when it comes to doing literature reviews, there are tools like lit maps, connected papers, research rabbit that can help you to identify the right kind of papers. R discovery, that's another tool. And there are many other tools. These are the ones that I know of. Certainly, there would be other tools that you can also explore. When it comes to, for example, reading papers, then tools like Outread or Speechify, they can help you to read the papers more effectively. And then there are other tools which can help you to talk to papers. Like I think Copilot, that's one tool which can help you to really do question answering with the paper. And then there are tools for presentations, like I know Gamma is a good tool, Canva is a good tool for making presentations. And as far as paper writing is concerned, so there are like these tools, for example, Paperball, Grammarly, and Tring II. Those tools can help you in sort of making your writing smooth, give it a good flow, and those sorts of things. And then there are obviously tools for example, that can help you as a PhD student to be more productive. But yeah, generally, I do speak, I do share my learnings about these tools on platforms like LinkedIn. So
All right. Fahim, I'm really thankful to you for joining the podcast. Trust me, it was really, really insightful and informational and really, really productive. So I'm sure that our audience will learn a lot out of this episode. So, in the last is not the question, but um, what message or advice would you like to give to our university students while they are engaged in their graduations and intermediate studies, or maybe in the masters or phds? Any general advice that could motivate them or inspire them or change their life?
Oh, okay, that's a very generic question. But well, one thing I can tell you that if you want to go into the research sector after, let's say, your bachelor's, the one thing you can do is that in your last year when you are doing the final year project, try to pick a research based project. And although it sounds too ambitious, but if you can publish a paper during your undergrad, or right after your undergrad, that would be a very big advantage to you, for or that would help you a lot in securing scholarships for your masters or for your PhDs. That's one thing. Um, the other thing, I believe that many times I've heard it from people that GPS doesn't matter. Um, I don't agree with it. I think that's very important when applications are assessed. They do check that what is the overall score of the student. So I would also suggest that um, for your 4 years of degree, try to keep your grades very good. And yeah, those are, I think, some of the basic things that I can suggest to people who aspire to get some scholarships for studying further, like into their masters or their PhD.